So, what happens when a thinker dies, but their ideas? Well, their ideas live on. After Karl Marx was gone, his work didn't just fade away. Instead, it split, heading down two totally different paths. One path led to revolution and state power, and the other? It led to a deep critical look at what modern life is even all about. Today, we're going to trace that split and see how it not only shaped the 20th century, but how it's still challenging us right now. You see, Karl Marx threw this massive rock into the pond of global thought with his critique of capitalism. But here's the thing about world-changing ideas. Once they're out there, they take on a life of their own. The huge question for everyone who came after him was, okay, so what do we do with this? And believe me, they could not agree. And that disagreement basically split his legacy right down the middle. It sparked this huge battle for the very soul of Marxism. On one side, you had the people who wanted power, to build nations, to control states, and on the other, you had those who were after something else entirely, real human liberation.
Okay, so let's start with that first group, the doers. We're talking about the Orthodox Marxists. These were the leaders who looked at Marx's writing not as a philosophical text, but as a literal playbook. They took his ideas right off the page and turned them into practical tools for revolution, for seizing control, and for building entire states in his name.
And we're talking about some huge names here. These guys didn't just read Marx, they practically rewrote him to fit their own reality. You've got Lenin, who updated Marx for a globalized world and created the blueprint for a hyper-disciplined revolutionary party. Then comes Stalin, who takes that party and uses it to forge a powerful totalitarian state. And then there's Mao, who looked at all this and said, hold on, what if your country is full of farmers, not factory workers? He had to adapt the whole shebang for China.
Yeah, the transformation under Stalin was total. I mean, he built this incredibly powerful, all-encompassing state where everything was centralized. And this became a huge point of contention. His rival Leon Trotsky famously called it a revolution betrayed. For Trotsky, this wasn't what Marx wanted at all. It was the complete opposite, a revolution that had totally lost its soul.
And this is where Mao's adaptation gets really fascinating. See, Marx was writing about industrialized Europe, right? His revolutionary hero was the factory worker. But Mao's China, it was a vast country of farmers, so he had to completely pivot. He made the peasantry, the farmers, the heart of the revolution. And the enemy wasn't just capitalism, it was the old system of feudalism and the influence of foreign powers.
This quote, it just says it all, doesn't it? Power comes through the barrel of a gun. That is pure Mao. He was a pragmatist, you know, almost more Machiavelli than Marx in some ways. For him, all the high-minded theory in the world didn't mean a thing without the force to back it up. It's a really stark, unsentimental view of how you get things done. And that philosophy translated directly into his military strategy. It wasn't about big, epic battles. Mao's whole idea of guerrilla warfare was more like a death by 1,000 cuts. Nibble like a rat. You don't take the enemy head-on, you wear them down. You take the countryside first, build your support, and only then do you move on the cities. It required incredible patience, but man, was it effective. But here's the thing with Mao. For him, the revolution never, ever ended. It wasn't something you did and then it was over. Nope. It had to be a constant, ongoing process. And this led to some frankly chilling strategies. First, the 100 Flowers campaign. He basically said, hey everyone, speak your mind, criticize us. But it was a trap to identify his opponents. And then came the brutal Cultural Revolution, launched to eliminate the very people who had just spoken up. Okay, so that's one path, the path of revolution, power, and the state. But while all of that was happening, a totally different branch of Marxist thought was growing, really in reaction to it all. This was a group of intellectuals who took Marx's work and aimed it not at seizing governments, but at understanding the state of the human soul. They looked at what was happening in places like the Soviet Union, and they had to ask themselves, is this it? Is this the only way? That question really became the launchpad for what we call the critical school, or the Neo-Marxists. They saw what happened with Orthodox Marxism and thought, no, this isn't freedom. This is just a new kind of prison. So they went back to Marx's early writings to find an alternative. And the shift in focus is just massive. The Orthodox Marxists, they were all about economics, about seizing the state. Their hero was the revolutionary. But the Neo-Marxists, they turned their attention to culture, to psychology, to what it means to be human. Their hero wasn't the revolutionary. It was the free, liberated individual. And at the core of their thinking was this one powerful concept from the Young Marx, alienation. You know that feeling? Like you're just a cog in a giant machine, disconnected from the work you do, from the people around you, maybe even from yourself? That's alienation. For these thinkers, that was the real enemy. The goal wasn't just about economic justice, it was about ending this deep, human separation.
And this is where their ideas get, well, they get really sharp and honestly a little uncomfortable because they stop looking just at the Soviet Union and turn their critical eye towards the West, towards us.
What they saw was this really disturbing trend. I mean, the whole story of history is supposed to be about humanity becoming more and more free, right? But they looked around and saw the opposite. They saw a new kind of slavery taking hold everywhere. And the really shocking part of their argument was that it wasn't just in totalitarian states. It was happening right here, in the free West, just in a much quieter, more subtle way. They argued that our modern systems, even science, were creating new forms of control. Now, they weren't anti-science, not at all, but they were deeply worried about what they called instrumental thinking. It's this obsession with the how over the why. We get so good at figuring out how to do things more efficiently that we completely forget to ask why we're doing them or if we even should be. Morality and values just get pushed to the side.
And this leads to their most provocative claim, that freedom we think we have in Western societies, the freedom to choose, to buy, to consume, they said it's an illusion, a comfortable cage. They argued that we've simply become slaves to the endless cycle of production and consumption.
A key thinker here, Herbert Marcuse, came up with this brilliant term for it, the one-dimensional man. His point was that human beings are supposed to be complex, multi-dimensional creatures, right? With art, philosophy, love, all this rich inner life. But in a society saturated by mass culture and consumerism, he said we get flattened into just one dimension, the consumer. Our desires and even our identities get shaped by the market.
This quote just nails that idea. We think we're making unique choices, but really, we behave like the herd of sheep and goats. It's a pretty harsh way to put it, but their point is that consumerism doesn't create individuality. It creates conformity. We all follow the same trends, buy the same stuff, and behave less like free individuals and more like a herd. So you can see how this leads to a pretty bleak outlook. Unlike the old-school Marxists who were sure a revolution was just around the corner, these thinkers were deeply pessimistic. They believed that modern capitalism had built the perfect trap. By making us all consumers, it satisfied our surface-level wants so well that the deeper desire for true freedom just faded away.
So where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us with this powerful, unresolved tension right at the very heart of Marx's legacy, an ideology literally torn in two.
On the one hand, you've got the revolutionaries. Their quest was for power, and the outcome was totalitarian states. And on the other hand, you have the thinkers. Their quest was for liberation, and their outcome was this profound critique of modern life that applies to any industrial society, capitalist or communist. When you boil it all down, the story of Marxism after Marx is really this epic conflict. It's a battle that shaped wars and nations, for sure, but it's also an internal struggle within the idea itself, between the hard-nosed pursuit of power and the philosophical search for what it truly means to be free.
And this is the question the Neo-Marxists leave us with. It's a challenge that steps out of the 20th century and speaks directly to us today. In a world defined by brands, trends, and what feels like endless choice, are we expressing our individuality, or are we just conforming to a script written for us? Are we, in fact, truly free?